Hello and welcome back to the Argyle CISO Leadership Forum. My name is Vicki Lynn with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. Just a couple of notes before I turn things over to our panel moderator for this session. Just a reminder to please stop by our sponsors' virtual booths at any time during today's event and for the following week. Our partners are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience today. At any time during the event, you can visit their virtual booths from the main agenda page, and those do include complimentary materials, information, and meet and greet opportunities. And to ask questions throughout this session and all sessions today, simply type into the Q&A chat and we'll address your questions at the end of the session. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Scott T. Lashway, partner and co-leader, privacy and data security practice at Manette. We are so excited to have Scott and our panelists with us for a panel discussion titled Data Governance Communication Best Practices. Welcome, Scott and panelists, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Vicki Lynn. It's a pleasure to see you all virtually here. I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the group for a brief introduction. Sarveshi.
Hi, nice to meet you all. I'm Sarveshi Shukla. I have been leading global organizations in app dev, BI, and infrastructural space. Have depth of 20 years of experience in various facets of IT, including IT security, and very excited to be on this panel. Flavia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Flavia Mitri. I am the Privacy and Cybersecurity Director for the Americas at Uber. So my experience might be a little bit different from my co-panelists here because I check the legal aspects of privacy and security for the company. Been at Uber for a little over 6 years, used to handle Latin America, and now cover US and Canada and our global privacy compliance program. Peter?
Good morning. Thanks for having me. Peter Rosario, CISO for USI Insurance Services. USI is a global company. We have about 180 offices across the US, just about 11,000 users spread out across the US. We've got clients all over the US, so we've got every compliance you can imagine that we've got to deal with. That's about all I can tell you. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Peter. Hi, Elizabeth Smith. I, like Flavia, I'm also a lawyer. I've been a privacy lawyer for over 20 years, and I'm currently the global privacy lead within the legal and compliance function at Seagen, which is an oncology-focused biotechnology company based in the Seattle area. Back to you, Scott.
Thanks, everyone. So we have lawyers, compliance, and technology covered on the panel, and we'll try to hit the various angles and from all of our collective experiences. So let's begin with the premise that data is become more and more valuable to the engine of companies, regardless of what industry you're working in. Some have referred to it as the new gold. I'm not sure we're going to test that premise here, but it is a critical asset at organizations that we all rely upon no matter what you're doing. And if you're not relying on data, you're certainly relying on technology to perform everyday needs and to implement your strategy and tactics for your company. With that, demands accessibility to data in technology, and the regulations that are out and are coming out, at least in the US, but elsewhere, both are encouraging accessibility of data, like interoperability rules coming out of the US in the healthcare space, to privacy regulations from various states that are seemingly coming almost on a monthly basis now. So we're going to start with what's the greatest challenge for cybersecurity leaders when attempting to balance both accessibility. Employees need the data, they need the technology, they need it at their homes where they often work now, and security, which we know brings with it a massive amount of obligation and potential risk. How does one go about that? And Sarveshi, let's start with you.
Absolutely. So it is one of our most pertinent problems as security leaders in the world. Like, without the, you cannot balance the two worlds just all right at all times. It is, you risk being called the villain in the organization either way. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. So it's one of those situations where, just like you said, data is the new oil, it's the new gold, it's what is needed everywhere. And the key challenges, from multi-cloud environments that we all see, the legacy environments that people are a part of. There are many organizations in many industries where things don't catch up to everything in cloud very quickly. And in that, how do you define yourself? How do you define your policies that kind of fit every realm? You've thought through every scenario that comes through. So there's this increasing complexity for sure. The thing that never goes off, no matter how advanced we get with AI and other things, is the user behavior. How do you ensure, especially in the environments that we are in, where there's so much of distributed workforce, how do you ensure the compliance, whether you're doing it from home, from a remote office, from a WeWork location, from your corporate offices? How do you manage and ensure that there is accessibility as well as added layer of security? In addition to that, like I said, with AI, with IoT, with blockchain, every time we introduce new technology, it obviously, opens up these vulnerabilities that security leaders have to be on top of at all given points in time. As you look at that, and you talked about it in the beginning around the regulatory compliance. So there are all these challenges that come with the debate, the forever ongoing debate about accessibility versus security. But there are strategies where you can, work through those and look at balancing the act. Through awareness, through training, multi-factor authentication that is now becoming very, very, very mainstream everywhere. In general, applying a zero trust security model where it's like never trust, always verify how you go about things. Role-based access controls are a few things that come to mind as we talk about how do we balance these situations out. I'd like to pause and hear more from my fellow panelists.
Sarveshi, I'm right with you, man. It's all about, right. All the items that you said, agree. That's what our world is today, right? Being a security leader. So the more that we educate and make staff aware, the more that we collaborate with our partners within the IT and business worlds, the better we can do it, right? Because to me, it's all about understanding and knowing who needs to get to what and how are we doing that securely, right? Because the more that we block, the more they're going to find inroads and then plays around us. So we consume a lot of data and understanding what is it you need, get it to us fast, let us understand it, and then we can allow you to get to it in a secure manner. So it's about awareness and knowledge to what it is that you're trying to do.
Right. And I think one of the other things, Peter, that I feel now in today's environment, the collaboration between the application teams, between your infrastructure team and your security team is even more needed than it was in the past with whether it was audits. And these are not fun things that everyone wants to do every other day, but that is what keeps the organizations going and growing in the environment of constant threat that we are in now.
Agree 100%. And let's not forget, our partners here on the call with us, legal, because we share a lot of data with legal and we're looking at the agreements to make sure that they're compliant with regulations and legally binding. Comments from yourselves, Elizabeth or Flavia. What are you guys seeing?
Or I don't have anything to add from the technical and security side of things. A lot of what you're describing is what we also implement. And Uber, obviously, I think for Uber, considering the age of the workforce, it is particularly difficult to navigate when there's any sort of friction for data access. There's this whole discussion about friction in the funnel. People want the data the fastest they can, the easiest process they can. So what we do is heavily invest on extremely user-friendly campaign and educations as to why we're implementing certain changes. We did, I think it's very public that we suffered an intrusion in our systems last year. And as a result of that, we changed completely our multi-factor process and the platforms that a person could access remotely. That led to significant complaints from the workforce, but we did that because we needed to strengthen the security. The other thing that we do, and this might be very particular to our operation, we are subject to a FTC consent order. So we are assessed externally every 2 years in certain elements of our program, which also include access control. So this is an extremely helpful measure in addition to the internal audits that we do, to have a sanity check of how well we are doing in certain components that we have to report to a regulator. And depending on the finding, we also socialize those internally so that people are also aware as to why we're implementing certain changes. I think that helps to make employees less removed from the decision and not really understanding why so many restrictions have been imposed. And that has proven to be very, very helpful because everyone plays an important role in the process.
100% agreed. We've got
Flavia,
a question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So Flavia, let me just work from that. And there's a question that came up that relates to kind of our next planned question. And maybe Elizabeth, you could get us started on this. So in my practice, I know we spend a lot of time with CISOs and CTOs and general counsel's office and chief compliance officers understanding the privacy and security landscape and where those risks may reside, right? So that's from the outside looking in on an organization. There's always a challenge, I think every organization, regardless of industry, your regulatory authorities, your technology stack, your global reach, there's always a challenge in understanding the need for availability of data and technology with its alignment on business strategy and growth. And so we often hear business leaders say, well, we need more technology, we need more flexibility, we need to be able to make that sale with data available to us on an iPad. But it's often hard to get those concrete metrics to say, here's what we really need, and here's what the investment is going to need to be to make that happen. Elizabeth, from a legal and compliance perspective, I guess, where do you see your role in helping foster that internal conversation between kind of business pressures, technology development, and that could include AI, right? There isn't a week that goes by where we're not all asked, can we implement AI here or there? Not to go down the AI rabbit hole, but how do you balance that? And how do you gather those metrics of what the business needs relative to the risks that we were just talking about?
I mean, I hate to give the lawyer answer, but it really does depend, right? It depends on the industry, it depends on the size of the organization, it depends on the culture, and it depends on how the organization's used to consuming that information. And so in some smaller organizations, I've seen, what I would call sort of vignette training, where we put out communications for specific groups about how that change is going to impact them. It might be like a 5-minute, e-learning kind of thing. But I think when it's a larger organization and you have to scale, you can try to do all staff company-wide communications to let them know, like, these are the impacts, and you're going to lose them, 9 times out of 10 if you start talking about the legal ramifications and why it matters, because they've seen it, they've heard it so much, they just don't think it's going to happen to them, or they think that their situation is different. So getting them the sort of the idea of what's the ROI to different parts of the organization, I think is really important, and really to make it as impactful as possible, kind of tailoring your message based on how it does impact legal versus how it impacts security versus how it impacts the marketing teams. I think it takes a lot more time, but it's time well spent if you have that opportunity.
I can jump in on that.
Flavia,
right?
Yeah, go ahead, Pete. Yeah,
I can jump on the back of that because you said some key terms in there that I completely agree with. Right, so it's getting out the communications, educating the workforce, making them aware of what their responsibilities are in regards to the laws and data security. I've been with the organization for 9 years. We built the program from scratch, and for the last 2 years, it's turned more to strategy. So I partner with business leads and go out and do in-person presentations and talk about the laws and regulations and what their responsibilities are with the data they're touching. Because we got several lines of business, so making them aware of their responsibilities. We've got security champions within the IT division who I meet with on an annual basis, and we train them. This is what we're looking for. When you see this and that, bring me in, bring the team in, and we spread that out through the project management offices, through the app dev offices. So we absolutely partnered with them. Everyone within the IT division at USI understands security and privacy. They take it seriously. So when something crops up, they immediately get it to us, and then we get in front of it as fast as we can. When I say we get in front of it, we get to those business leaders. Hey, let's talk. Let me give you a presentation. Let's get your teams together. I'll bring you breakfast. I'll bring you lunch. I will fly to where you are. I want to meet your needs. Let me educate you on why we can't do it that way, and this is the best way we can do it for you. So yeah, there's a lot of collaboration in our world today. So what are you going to say, Scott? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. One real quick thing that I wanted to add in addition to what Peter just said. I think one thing that we found very helpful in various digital transformations that I've led is making security as one of the centerpieces of implementation, as we are talking about it right in the beginning. Why? So when you're talking through any implementation in terms of role-based access, we called it building a business case for access of data. That yes, we are democratizing data, but in a democracy, when you have rights, you also have responsibilities. So you have to ensure that I have been in environments where any kind of data, sales data, was accessible to anyone in the organization. And when the questions started being asked as to why, it was not a pleasant conversation. But then we started really enhancing on the whys, to Peter's point, right, working through with app dev leaders, with the business leaders, that who truly really needs this access? Why do we need this access? Do we really need 10 years of access in a click today? Or is it something that you really needed based on an SLA? So it's a mix of, people, process, technology in general, to, things that have produced results for me in the past.
Beautiful.
Sorry, Scott, really done this time.
No, that's all helpful. And maybe we can spend just a second longer on AI. And I'll just say, AI conversation from a lawyer's perspective has to begin with, what are you really talking about? So AI is just commonly used now to talk about everything. And I think we need to begin a conversation internally at an organization with, let's focus on what is your need and what is the technology you're actually speaking about before we just start assuming it's AI. Yeah. The other thing to remind ourselves about is AI has been around for decades. So there's this pressure now to implement it everywhere. And that's exciting for a lot of organizations, especially organizations, I'm sure, that have younger folks, younger personnel in it who are using it maybe in their everyday lives. But Flavia, let me start this question with you, and this is coming in from the audience. So with AI systems becoming more readily available, either offered by the company or available publicly, and someone wants to use it to perform their job responsibilities, do you want to share some thoughts on both the privacy and kind of legal risk areas, but also the potential biases or dangers in using these newer forms of AI?
Sure. And I also cannot agree more with your description that sometimes people say it's AI and they have no idea what they're talking about, or there is just this assumption that the AI will necessarily bring an improvement to certain processes, but there's no data substantiating that. And I feel that people are on this boom to chase around, especially generative AI, and how to embed that into specific processes, because there's just like this perception that everything is going to be made better with them. At least internally at Uber, we've adopted the following approach. As of a baseline, we do not recommend our personnel to, they are welcome to use generative AI platforms as long as they don't share any PII with the platform. And then we have very few distinctions for vendors that have already been pre-approved and with whom we negotiated very specific data processing agreements where we were able to agree on a zero retention policy, or that the data that we're, because the model will be the best the more data you present to the model, because then it's going to be trained and it's going to reduce the level of biases and inaccuracies of it. No model is bias free. And that's the first thing I think people should really understand. Depending on your use, you really need to do some sort of fairness testing to ensure that you're capturing right where the model needs to be improved and whether you can effectively implement that for a specific data processing activity. So we made the baseline rule of no PII exception to very specific approved vendors, no data retention policy, and such vendors have contractually agreed that they will not use the data that is submitted under the corporate license, because they also operate under two models, right? There's generally the free license and then the corporate license. Well, you pay and then you're able to agree to specific conditions. And under the corporate license, they also commit to not use the data shared under that license to train their models. I think it's still too soon for us to make, and data protection authorities are heavily assessing these players to verify whether they're complying with what they are contractually agreeing with. I think time will tell. But one effort that we really do internally is whenever there's this pitch of we want to enhance whatever process by implementing AI because we're sure that there is an improvement done, we challenge where that certainty of improvement comes from. Do we have the data to back up? Will we have the ability to test instead of rolling it out? Because maybe this is also very particular to my industry where people have like an urgency to make things happen. But, test with a very small pilot in a very small city with less of a privacy strict regulation applicable there. So it also decreases the risk for the company. These conversations are difficult to manage because they spread out very fast. And we see a lot of companies simply using or stating that they're using these new models in ways that I don't think they have been properly vetoed or tested yet. So I think it's also a fine balance of managing the anxiety of the team that really wants to use these new features and having a more formal, strict review process in place.
And let me ask a question following that. Maybe Elizabeth, you could start on this, and I'm interested in everyone's view here. So a long time ago, we used to have written policies and procedures that said things like you can use technology for work-related reasons only. And then as availability of data and things like data lakes came around, we started saying things like you can use the data at the company only for business purposes. And that's become a little bit of a paradigm problem because what does that mean to use it only for company purposes? And we're seeing, I think in different industries, a little bit more of a prescriptive approach. You can use this data for this reason. And part of that's driven, I think, from various privacy regulations. We collected this data to do this, and we can only do that with it. And so you at the company can only do this. So with that kind of context, I assume the communication challenges have only increased with respect to availability of technology and data and the use of technology and data. Flavia was just speaking about AI and company licenses versus open licenses. Elizabeth, have you seen these challenges where you're having to become more prescriptive as to what you can and can't do with the company resources, technology, data? And if so, how are you seeing that be effectively communicated to the user population in line with your company strategy?
Absolutely, it's getting more complicated. There are like a dozen state privacy laws in the U.S. now. In the state where my company is based, Washington, we have this My Health, My Data Act, which has very prescriptive, very restrictive requirements for using data that we collect when it's related to a person's health. And we don't have a good strategy at this moment because we're responding to the many laws that have been enacted in pretty rapid succession. And fortunately, most of them are taking effect in a few months or even longer timeline. So we are strategizing and looking at that. But the challenge is that these things keep coming and we keep going to our constituents to say, hey, there's this new law. You know, a few years ago, it was the California Consumer Privacy Act. A couple of years before that, it was GDPR. Now it's this slew of state laws, and they all have their own little take on it. We also have, you know, the Federal Trade Commission weighing in on health data in the online space. So we have a lot of, I mean, it's a storm of things right now. And so, you know, when I talk to people about, well, this is what we're doing, this is how we're examining this, it's with the idea of coming back to what Sarveshi was saying, security, you know, upfront, privacy upfront. So privacy and security by design, which is something we know, like from GDPR, we should have been doing 5 years ago. But most companies that are based in the US, at least in my experience, hesitate to import laws from other places when they're more restrictive. It's coming anyway, right? The state laws are doing it. They're doing it on a very granular, specific level as to what data you can share with third parties, what data you can share with affiliates, providing the ability for the end users to be able to say at a granular level, I want you to not use my data for that reason. I need to know who you shared it with, and giving the contact information for those people that you shared it with so that you can go find out what do those people have about me, what do they know, and ask them to review or delete that data. It's a very attenuated stream of data ownership that you cannot do without really good, successful data governance. And I think a lot of people are just sort of waking up to that now because, like you said, Scott, it was, you know, you can use it for company purposes. Well, yeah, actually, you can use it for some company purposes now and only some parts of the data. And, you know, if you got it, if you licensed it from someone else and they have restrictions on what you can do with it, you need to follow those too. So there are a lot of things that we have to keep track of, and it's becoming more challenging. And like I said, we don't have a perfect answer at this moment.
And just coming in on that, Elizabeth, everything you said is absolutely spot on and relevant in terms of what goes on today. And adding to that complexity is also our vendor ecosphere, where, you know, when you interact with different vendors, when you do business through sometimes different vendors, what is it that you are permitted to do through them, not permitted to do through them? I mean, sometimes it feels like, you know, death by policy, but it is very, very important. And it's so, if we don't pay attention to it now, just like you said, people are reacting to GDPR more and more now, whereas if it was done a couple of years ago, we would be in a very different situation today. And Scott, to your point, the new buzzword, new thing with generative AI and everything else, it's our policies, they just have to be flexible enough to be accommodating these various landscapes. And I keep bringing back the situations that I see very often where organizations are not all future forward. They're not all in environments where everything is cloud-based and modern. Right. I see a big mix, especially in our state organizations, our government-based organizations, where there's a lot of dependency in very old historic technology even today. And that suddenly changes. How do you define it? Like if I have one piece of information, one piece of data in this very old system, which can be accessed by everyone because I have no more methods to restrict it, versus everything that is on data lake, which is very differently accessible. So I think it is a mix where we, as our generation of IT leaders, are learning and putting things together. But in a not so long time, we will have, like, these will become cornerstone practices for our generation of leaders to come.
And Pete, maybe to take a thread of that discussion, do you see opportunities for additional automated controls to help implement these more prescriptive restrictions on data and technology use? So the easy examples are multi-factor. We had a question about DLP or data loss protection. Is technology part of the solution here, or does technology kind of add to the complexities of having to deal with these risks?
It's both. So yeah, we use a lot of technology in our space to try to deal with the regulations as far as monitoring and blocking things. But we use it multiple different ways. We collect a lot of logs using different tools. DLP being one of the tools that we use to feed back into our SIMs. So we have a user. A UBA, right, to see what users are doing with that data, and we'll look at the various alerts and we'll fine tune things to determine, okay, is this an issue or do they need to use this data so they're going around it? So we're using technologies on both sides to help enforce laws and regulations, and then to understand what the users are doing so we can try to create solutions for them. So that goes back to our collaboration earlier with the project management teams, with the business leads, and with the application development. Like, hey, we keep seeing users knocking up against this block here. What can you find out what the issue is, what they're trying to do, so we can kind of help them get to that information in a better way. So it's both. We're using technologies in multiple different ways today.
Do you think there's an opportunity? So we're getting a lot of questions about artificial intelligence. Do you see an opportunity where AI starts becoming part of the solution to these risks that we're talking about, or are we still kind of at the infancy of AI development with respect to routine use in an organization?
We're twofold answer. So we're working on our own internal AI model, so they're not going out and using an external one. So we're blocking that, but we realized the need a few months ago. So we are building our own internal model with Microsoft's aid, and then we're looking at tools that are using AI, because yeah, it's faster, but we want to make use of it. So we've got 2 open projects where we're trying to use AI for our security products to make them smarter, to collect data and make us faster, and then creating an AI model so all of the staff members that are trying to use AI and things like ChatGPT and OpenAI, well, we're going to give you a solution for that. We'll work on it as fast as we can, but you got to give us a little bit more time, because we realize that there's a benefit to giving them that data, access to that AI. Right. Sarvesh, are you doing anything with AI in your world?
Yeah.
We are still playing a bit of catch up in various environments, but it is one of those things where our consumer driven world can really gain a lot through generative AI, but not quite there yet.
Okay.
Flavia, you were speaking about implementation of AI before, and we have a question from an audience member about the strategy for implementing AI to augment human intelligence instead of replacing it, or is there a need to vet it? Now, my quick answer to the second part is, if you're going to implement AI in your organization, it absolutely needs to be vetted by both your technology team, your CISO, but also legal and compliance, and maybe other parts of the organization, for lots of reasons. Like, there was a question earlier about bias and whether AI could bring bias to the table. Certain industries have had problems with bias before. But Flavia, have you seen opportunities where AI can again help reduce some of the privacy and security risks we're talking about here, and it's also augmenting human intelligence? Or do you think we're still at that infancy?
So I personally think we're still at the infancy, at least on the processes that I have seen. I've seen it improve, but we had a lot of data to be able to reach the statement that the adoption of AI had improved a process that was conducted by a human from beginning to end. I also want to flag something here. Not sure if this question is tackling that, but certain jurisdictions will never allow for a process to be fully automated from beginning to and will always require that the data subject, which is the individual, has the opportunity to opt out from any full automated process. This is the case for GDPR and a lot of GDPR mirror-like regulations that we have in very big jurisdictions throughout the world. So I think this is still going to be further regulated by AI acts that are being enacted post-privacy regulation. But right now, I don't think anyone really knows how to navigate this with absolute certainty, because the regulatory framework is still being developed.
And let me just ask that question because you're headed there. So we often get the question on panels like this, you know, how do cybersecurity leaders efficiently keep abreast of changing security and privacy obligations, whether it be a new NIST framework coming out or a 2.0 version of NIST coming out, or new privacy regulations, most of which have a security tail. You know, they'll include language that says, by the way, you need to have reasonable and adequate security. And if you don't, then you don't have adequate privacy. The easiest way to keep abreast is to have a friendly lawyer who tracks all this. But how do you, I guess to take that, that's my own plug. I guess to take that question to kind of the next level, how do you stay abreast of where it's going so that you're not simply being reactive constantly inside your organization that Elizabeth spoke about earlier, which is a massive challenge for all of us? How do you see around those corners?
So in our case, to avoid it becoming a very lonely thing, and also I think internally we're sometimes biased. We think whatever regulation will be really applicable to us. I find participating in industry associations incredibly helpful because then you can benchmark from other members of the industry. I've had incredible insights coming out of these meetings. I think it's hard unless you have an army of people, both from your policy team and your legal team, to be always up to date. Working also with policy advisors has proven to be very efficient, and logically communicating well. I think the worst case that can happen is a company being surprised with whatever regulation that has already been enacted, and it's going to be enforced in super short period of time. And then you have to do all these changes to your processes. One thing that we've learned the very hard way, but we do it now, is whenever we see a bill that is going to be passed or potentially will be passed on a jurisdiction that's important for us, we already do a gap assessment on the bill stage. This is hard in the US because it's state regulated and it's becoming a nightmare to navigate. But we do make the choice of states that are more critical for our operation. And when we do and we anticipate the gap assessment before the bill kicks in, that saves us a lot of time.
And can I ask, maybe Sarveshi and P and Elizabeth, I'm interested in your take on this too, but CISO's favorite topic from my perspective is their budget. And so when you're having to prepare annual budgets and maybe 3 or 5 year forecasts, but you have very difficult challenges understanding where the regulatory world is taking us and what you can and can't do and what your obligations will be or won't be. How do you bake in seeing around these corners into that annual budget process? In other words, you probably didn't budget for developing AI 3 years ago, but now there's a burgeoning need inside your organization, which may require a whole different security stack or at least some additional features. Thoughts on how CISOs can go about that in today's day and age?
So it's a very relevant question, things that I think we all have to face with very, very quickly. And I think one thing that really keeps it challenging is that a lot of security budget is in the operational bucket. So as you're talking through it, how do you make a case for what is capitalizable? How do you work through that part? Right. So I think one thing that has helped in the process I've seen is collaboration alongside various teams. So it'll require building a true business case with your finance team, with your app dev team, because it impacts and making it a very grassroots foundational program, something that has the buy-in of your exec leadership as well. And you need to sort of, not to raise a fire alarm, but build it, bake it in that this is for, the same way you look at training, the same way you look at continuous improvement, the same way. So there is a dedicated portion that you're looking at. It's not burn the bank, but the value of it, the ROI that you present for that business case is that we are trying, to your point, not be reactive at all times, investing in some subscription services that keep you abreast on top of your privacy laws, in addition to what Flavia had just mentioned. All of that, it comes into this little bucket. But as we are seeing this changing landscape, security tends to be one of those areas which get axed quite a lot. That, when we're talking about the new next shiny object, it's not in the security world that you're looking. But I think the case is that if you don't do this, there is a very relevant threat that you are about to face, and you're not prepared for it. So I think, not to sound alarmist, but you have to walk that talk. Pete, what are your thoughts on that?
Right, I'm nodding because I'm agreeing 100% with you. Right, I don't know what the budget is. I don't even know if there's a tool built for it. So it's build that AI model and turn it, and then let us see if we can see what you're doing.
Yeah.
But we certainly put a little flag on that. We need money for this when it's finally done, because I don't know what this is. So we're waiting for that AI engine to be built. They know we're sitting aside waiting to, how do we validate the security and compliance of that thing you just created? Make sure you left some money somewhere for me, because I'm going to need to lock that down.
True.
Right.
True.
Right. So it's not an open checkbook, but there's a line item that doesn't have a mark in it, but they know we're going to need to secure it somehow once that thing is built.
Yeah.
So it's definitely tough.
So there's a question in here. Maybe I'll take it quickly and then move on to a couple other audience questions, since we're now in that period of time. We have 4 minutes left if you have any final questions. So one question is, if you're going to use AI, how do you know that it's not compromised or won't lead to a compromise? My quick answer is, you need to treat AI that's developed from a third party as a vendor. So just because everyone's excited about it inside of an organization, and just because you're under massive pressure, whether you're legal or compliance or technology or CISO, you can't throw out the playbook that you've used or you've developed to install new technology. And obviously there's logical reasons for that, and there's logical tools you can use, like air gapping the technology, not plugging it into your stack. But you need to be very cautious. It's foreign technology, and I wouldn't just let anybody in. I would assume that it's compromised or will lead to security risk. But there's another question here I want to tackle quickly. So how do you handle the challenge of lawyers and compliance experts lacking advanced cloud security technical expertise? And we see this all the time in our practice, where the conversation between technologists, CISO, legal, compliance is not always on the correct level. And every organization is going to have this, because you might have a really sophisticated CISO and not a sophisticated general counsel's office. But maybe open this up to everyone for 30 seconds. Give us some practical tips on how do you ensure that everybody on your team is speaking the same language with respect to sophistication of cloud, AI, any new technology implementation.
Presentations and awareness, right? Once it's built, let's get legal, compliance, security together and do a presentation to make sure, or as best as we can, make sure everyone's on the same page. So like this, we're allowed to ask questions and get answers.
I'd also add to that, specialize your legal department. If you have a strong requirement for a cloud background, hire a lawyer that has that background, that doesn't come naturally. There are excellent people out there. And I think sometimes people assume that lawyers will know everything about all areas of the law, which is not true.
I agree with Flavia, where it really helps in this current changing landscape to have people with that specialized expertise within the technology space. But what helps in the interim is close collaboration between tech leaders and the legal team. Each contract that you go through, you learn from there. So build live documentation of what you learned in there and apply it to the next one, because within that space they don't tend to change too much, but there is still learning involved. So continuous learning environment.
Elizabeth?
I would just say I agree with what's been said. You know, there is a gap to bridge, but if you can find yourself a lawyer who also has a technology background, you are golden. You are so lucky because there aren't that many of them, but they are really helpful to have around. At least for me, you know, a non-technical person.
Okay.
Well, thank you, everyone. We'll turn it back to Vicki Lynn here, but I really enjoyed the discussion and working with you all today. So thanks a lot.
Same
Vicki
here.
Lynn?
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Scott, Flavia, Peter, Sarvishi, and Elizabeth. This was a fabulous panel discussion. It could have gone on for another hour, I'm sure. I want to thank you again for joining us as panelists and Scott as moderator. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today for this session. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event.